Hi everybody! Thank you for your continued support over on Instagram. We have just finished Tier 2 of the Unexplained Mystery Iceberg, so I'm going to post it here in its entirety on YouTube. If you're new here, this is what I'm talking about. It's this extremely long list of unexplained mysteries, and it has like 700 entries on it. I filmed a much better intro, but the sound got messed up. So without further ado, here's the video. If you've been unsuccessfully trying to get pregnant, go to Bavaria, I guess. So we start off with a legend about 3 fertility goddesses. It's kind of a mix of Celtic and Norse mythology. In earlier versions of the legend, the 3 represent different aspects of Mother Earth and play a part in winter solstice rituals. They are often depicted holding chalices, grain, and baskets of fruit. You know, things associated with a bountiful harvest. There are other versions where the 3 represent the different stages of the fertility cycle. Maiden, mother, and crone. So, young girl, adult woman, elderly. That's a pretty common theme in pagan mythology, and it ties the 3 women to the stages of crops: growth, harvest, and bare fields. The goddesses are considered patrons of local springs and fields, and there is a tradition that women wanting to become pregnant should visit a Bethan stone, which are ancient stones inscribed and dedicated to the goddesses, usually placed beside said springs. And like a lot of pagan history, things get kind of muddled when the Catholics pull up. From that point, they sort of shifted into the saints Barbara, the patron of craftsmen, Catherine, patron of girls and women, and Margaret, the patron of farmers and childbirth, only to be removed from the official list of saints in 1969. Nowadays, they are just a mostly forgotten superstition, but there has been a recent push to adopt them as symbols of feminism. Some absolute creep impersonates a missing teenager. Nicholas Barclay was 13 years old when he went missing in San Antonio, Texas in the summer of 1994. His home life was really unstable, and he had spent some time in juvenile detention, so it wasn't really uncommon for him to disappear for a few days without warning. Therefore, it did not immediately raise any red flags when he didn't return home from playing basketball with friends. He would not be reported missing until 3 days had passed. Local police were so used to disturbances from that address that they didn't take the report very seriously. 3 years later, the Barclay family receive a call from the authorities in Spain that Nicholas has turned up at a youth shelter. He claims that he had just escaped from human traffickers. He returned home to Texas, but family members were a little bit suspicious because his eye color had changed and he had a different accent. But he had some kind of half-assed excuses for both of those things. A reality show caught wind of the case and wanted to feature it in an episode. As part of their background research, the show hired a private investigator, who quickly figured out that this new Nicholas was actually 23-year-old Frederick Bourdain from France. And this was not the first time he has tried to pull this stunt either. No, he's done it almost 500 times across 12 different countries. In this case, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison for passport forgery and identity theft. But that didn't really deter him because he kept doing it after being released. And to this day, Nicholas Barclay is still missing. Does this cryptic puzzle make any sense to you? The MayDay riddle takes the form of a full-page ad published on May 1st in the University of Arizona school newspaper. This has been a yearly occurrence since the 80s. And they're all signed at the bottom with this little guy. If you want to see the full catalog, you can find it at maydaymystery.org. The website itself is extremely Y2K, but it has been updated as of 2023. I clicked through all of them, and they are incomprehensible as far as I'm concerned. They are full of different languages, obscure symbols, and mathematical equations. A lot of them have a religious leaning, and the occasional pop culture reference. They mention Hotel California a lot. They're on some Pepe Sylvia level stuff here. The design style seems to have changed sometime around 2020, and mushroom clouds are a prominent feature now. Boil them in their own blood. Orphans preferred. They look too much like homework for me to process them in any real capacity. My brain just starts making dial-up sounds. And so I leave you with, a diamond is traumatized mud. I'll let Squidward, aka Captain Magma, introduce this next one.
Krakatoa!
Krakatoa is a volcanic caldera located in Indonesia. The eruption that garnered its big scary reputation took place in 1883. With an explosion equal to 200 megatons of TNT, or 13,000 times the size of the Little Boy atomic bomb. So what was it up to before that? Maybe a comparable eruption in 416 AD? Maybe. The primary record of this is from a compilation of the history of Java written in the 19th century, and the year might be a little off. since the Shaka calendar system referenced in the text does not quite align with the Western calendar. We do know for sure that something went down in 536 AD. There are plenty of records spanning numerous cultures of a period of altered global climate and strange atmospheric phenomenon. Tree ring and ice core data point to major volcanic activity. They aren't entirely sure which volcano. Basically, when you start looking that far back into history, things get a lot less precise and we end up with a lot of unanswered questions. Is it an interstellar power plant or just a cloud of dust? It would probably take me at least half of the video just to say the title of this one, so here it is typed out. That is the name of a star in the constellation Indus, and it's been recorded behaving weirdly, suddenly dimming by almost 70% with no known cause. I wish I could get more technical with you, but I have no background in astronomy and could not interpret some of the things I was reading. It could have been eclipsed by another planet, or a cloud of dust, or it was just doing some other unpredictable space-type activity. Because, say it with me, space is scary. But ooh, what if it's aliens? Dyson sphere, baby, let's go! The concept was proposed by astronomer Freeman J. Dyson in 1960. It would theoretically be a big structure built around a star by a hypothetical advanced extraterrestrial civilization in order to harness and amplify its power, to use for things like space travel. You'll see them referenced sometimes in science fiction, but they are theoretically possible, just not for us right now. Dyson proposed that searching for evidence of such a structure could lead us to discover intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. So when a star is behaving in an abnormal way, it does raise some speculation. Another example of this is Tabby's star. Was George Orwell onto something? Will you let him cook? While the concept of memory holes originates from fiction, it's not that hard to imagine in real life. And I'm sure you feel like you've experienced an instance of this before, because we probably all have. It's basically a way of hiding undesirable information from the general public. In the book 1984, the memory hole is a literal chute for unsavory historical documents to be disposed of. But metaphorically, it's just a place to put any suspicious evidence in order for it to be lost and forgotten. Think destroying documents and replacing them with a state-sponsored version of the truth. Or perhaps the way your videos get suppressed if you talk about certain current events. You will also catch this happening in the public relations industry if you're paying attention. And of course, you'll notice governments doing it too. Do y'all want to see a yucky old finger that might have belonged to a giant? Ew! Gregor Spurry, I think I pronounced that right, it's got this thing, went to Egypt in the 80s to go root around in some historic sites and keep ill-begotten artifacts as souvenirs. After a very unsuccessful day of crawling around in the Great Pyramid, the hotel bartender gives Mr. Mann the contact information of a man named Naguib who descends from a family of prolific grave robbers. So the next day, he drives a few hours outside of Cairo to go check out Naguib's wares. One specific object had been in his family's possession for around 150 years, but very few people outside of the family had ever seen it. In exchange for $300, Sperry was allowed to see and photograph it. But what was this coveted relic? A really big, mummified humanoid finger. The thing is 35 centimeters or a little over a foot long. Look at that nasty thing! So that links it to the very extensive conspiracy theories regarding Nephilim, or a supposed race of prehistoric giants. You know, claiming they actually existed. Or the ancient Sumerian deities known as the Anunnaki, who are theorized by UFO enthusiasts to be giant extraterrestrials, who pulled up to ancient Mesopotamia with all their sick technology. Aliens and giants will come up a lot. The murder mystery puzzle that only 4 people have been able to successfully complete. My toxic trait is thinking that I absolutely could solve it, when in reality I would probably get irritated and quit after about 2 hours. The book Kane's Jawbone was published in 1934 and takes the form of a murder mystery novel, but all the pages are in the wrong order. The reader is then tasked with tearing out all the pages and arranging them into the correct order to form a cohesive storyline. The amount of total possible combinations is a gigantic number with 158 digits. 2 readers in the 30s were able to successfully solve it, but the solution was believed to be lost up until a recent republishing. The 2 people who solved it this time around were able to really focus in on it thanks to the COVID lockdown. They were each awarded £1,000 from the publisher in exchange for promising to keep the solution secret. I've seen the book on sale online for like $10, so if I randomly lock myself in my room for a few months, that might be why. But you know, still check on me because I have depression. Do you recognize this complete jabroni who pushed a lady in front of a bus? During the morning commute on May 5th, 2017 in London, a bus driver was forced to suddenly swerve as a woman fell out into the road inches from the bumper. Here is the bus camera footage of the incident. You see this man out for a jog when he suddenly decides to go shove this woman into oncoming traffic before continuing his run without even looking back. About 15 minutes later, he jogs back through the area, completely avoiding any confrontation about what he literally just did. The police and the internet went on the hunt, but to this day, he has yet to be identified, with the official investigation being closed in 2018. But it's worth noting, if you've ever been to London, you'll know it feels like there are at least 5 CCTV cameras pointing at you at any given time, with around 700,000 estimated to be operating within the city as of 2020. According to Wired, the average person in London is captured on security footage around 300 times a day. The ethicality of that aside, you would assume that the incident would have been captured from every possible angle, making it really easy to identify the perpetrator. So why wasn't it? So you know what the uncanny valley is, right? It's the psychological response that makes us feel creeped out by things that look almost human, but not quite. But why is that response automatically programmed into all of our squishy gray computers? Let's go ahead and get all of the calm explanations out of the way. Maybe it was an instinct to keep us from hanging around diseased corpses. Or it could be a leftover from early Homo sapiens back when there were other hominids running around. But some of us have Neanderthal DNA, so they clearly weren't that repulsed by each other. Now on to the creepy one, you impatient rascals. Now consider, what if dating back to ancient times there was something out there that looked human, but wasn't? And it was such a threat to us that the fear of it was essentially written into our ancestral DNA. Like, natural selection deemed the urge to get away from this human-ish thing imperative to our survival as a species. I don't know about you, but the thought that there was some dangerous entity that appeared human but wasn't, lurking out there, hunting our ancestors, makes me feel straight up nauseous. And I see y'all in the comments accusing me of being Uncanny Valley.
That is not nice.
Do y'all remember that period of time where there were just clowns everywhere? Well, you know what I mean. I think 2016 is the year that our timeline got screwed up, and it hasn't been normal ever since. God, it doesn't really feel like it's been 7 years since the clown outbreak, but it has. Apparently the first incident took place in South Carolina, because of course it did. And why wouldn't it be South Carolina? And just to be clear, I was not responsible, even though I am, genetically, 1/4 clown on my dad's side. The news of this first incident caused an uptick in clown sightings, and arrests of miscreants in clown costumes. There were several injuries as a result of this trend, but it was usually the clown that ended up in the hospital. A lot of people suspected that this was some sort of viral marketing stunt for the movie It, but that was never confirmed. The fact that we all forgot about this whole thing, and the fact that it doesn't even sound that bizarre or newsworthy now, is just a testament to how weird things have gotten since then. Do you remember this lost creepypasta? And a huge thank you to Skibbity Toilet for making my research on this one extra difficult. Oh god. Oh god. At least this one doesn't make me look sick. Camera heads, in the context of this chart, are a cryptid that can be traced back to an early creepypasta circa 2009 that was lost and has only been partially found. Efforts to locate the original story on X, the 4chan one, not Muskie Boy, via Wayback Machine have been unsuccessful. So we have to rely on what Reddit has been able to scrounge up. They are supposedly humanoid entities that have cameras implanted into their eyes so they can function as a discrete surveillance system. The original included some videos and was described by some as being sort of a proto-ARG. The general consensus based on the recollection of users is that the story begins with a man finding a videotape in a backpack on the side of the road, along with a note that says, "I killed a camera head." The man subsequently becomes obsessed with finding out more about camera heads and drives himself to madness. It does sound vaguely familiar to me, and I was lurking around that corner of the internet back then, but I mean, it's a creepypasta. A lot of them sound similar, so who knows. A town terrorized by a winged something. In 1925, residents were supposedly besieged by a flying creature in the skies over Berkshire, Vermont. The awful, as it was dubbed, was described as looking similar to the mythical griffin with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle. The first sighting was from 2 mill workers who claimed to have seen the creature perched atop a nearby building. Anyway, one of the workers got so freaked out he had a minor heart attack. From that point forward, the townsfolk were reporting frequent sightings. Anything from their livestock being stolen to hearing the creature land on the roof of their house, until the whole thing sort of started to die down around 1928. Nobody knows what it actually was. Could have been a real animal. Could have been a hoax. I've seen people suggesting that it was somehow Mothman or the Jersey Devil. Yeah, I don't get that one. However, people do still claim to see it from time to time. It would have really sucked to be a French horse in August of 2020, but it was 2020, so it sucked to be a person as well. Just not quite as bad. This one was going on while we were all supposed to be inside making whipped coffee and watching Tiger King, not ritualistically sacrificing horses in the French countryside. In some instances, the horses were slashed crudely with a blade, with one farmer having had an altercation with an armed trespasser, but he got away. The authorities were all ready to attribute these incidents to some weirdo with a knife. But, ooh, let's talk about some of the other instances. Surgical precision. Bodies drained entirely of blood. Eye and ear missing on just one side, with some internal organs neatly removed. The official answer is cult ritual, but they sure are sounding really similar to the cattle mutilations that the UFO community will be very familiar with. I've seen so many theories regarding cattle mutilation, like enough to make 5 more videos. And I might, but boy are there some similarities. Beginning in the 1970s, ranchers in the southwestern United States began reporting cattle in their herd turning up dead, completely drained of blood, and missing body parts. And there are usually many other weird circumstances surrounding the cow, but another video. Like Stonehenge, but underwater. McDonald Lake in Ontario, Canada is home to a mysterious stone structure found 40 feet or 12 meters below the surface. And the pictures of it are really good. The structure consists of a large flat stone weighing around 1,000 pounds, sitting on top of 7 smaller stones. And that sits atop a larger slab at the edge of an underwater cliff. There was brief consideration to the idea that the stones could have fallen that way naturally. But after further examination, archaeologists determined that it was in fact man-made. The last time that piece of land had been accessible was during a severe drought in 8000 BC for some idea of how old the structure might be. Ontario was very sparsely inhabited at the time, so nobody is sure what group made the structure or what purpose it might have served. One hypothesis is that they chose to settle around the lake because it was home to a specific type of trout that was able to survive glacial conditions. The area where the stones were placed likely was at the edge of the lake, with the cliff being the lake itself. So make of that what you will. Do you know what this symbol means? Why, it's none other than our good friend, right angle with downward zigzag arrow. Or Angar. And nobody really knows what it means or why it was included in Unicode. Unicode came about in the late 80s, early 90s as a unified index of all the text characters you can see on a computer screen. It's regularly updated and emojis are included. It covers all modern languages and mathematical symbols and has even been expanded to include things like Egyptian hieroglyphics. But where does the Angar come in and what does it mean? It may represent a grounded high voltage path, but that might just be an adopted use of the already existing symbol. And some mathematicians view it as depicting a graph. And I saw some people online referring to it as the Larry Potter symbol. Interestingly, under the kanji character section, there are several ghost kanji of unidentifiable origin. So it's not the only strange thing that ended up in the mix. But once something's in the index, it's not going anywhere. If you're ever in their area of California, why don't you pay them a visit? Just kidding, please don't. In the town of Yucaipa, situated outside San Bernardino, resides a reclusive family known by locals as the Watchers. They sit in their boarded-up house day in and day out, staring out the windows, and they have cameras pointed at the street. If a car slows down or anyone shows any interest in their house, they all come running out the door with weapons ready to attack.
Scoot up more.
The story goes that their daughter was supposedly assaulted during a home invasion, and that's why they're so protective now, but that hasn't been confirmed. This is unfortunately, for their sake, a self-perpetuating issue, because of course people want to swing by their house and see if they'll come out and chase them. Even becoming a Halloween rite of passage for local teenagers, akin to spending a night in a haunted house. As of a few years ago, the home has been sold and nobody knows where the family went. Probably for the best. Was this building designed by aliens? So the chart says Integratron, but that's nothing. So I think they made a typo and meant Integratron because that is something. It is in fact a domed building located in Joshua Tree, California that was built by George Van Tassel, a ufologist and supposed abductee. He says the building can facilitate time travel and anti-gravity and that the building itself has anti-aging properties. Oh, and the building instructions were given to him by extraterrestrials. They spoke to him telepathically during his meditation sessions out in the desert. And he was an aircraft engineer. Like, this dude worked for Lockheed. So he built the thing himself starting in the mid-1950s, claiming that the building site is home to an electromagnetic anomaly. And the aliens specifically told him not to use any metal building materials because it would interfere with the frequency of the land. It would change hands several times following Van Tassel's passing in 1978. It almost became a disco, but its use since 2000 has been as a center for meditation and sound baths due to its great acoustics. So great, in fact, that the Arctic Monkeys recorded a song there in 2008. Ew! Did that mummy just wink at me? Rosalia Lombardo was born in Palermo, Italy in 1918 and passed away from pneumonia in 1920. And she was more or less taxidermied. Her grieving father wanted her body to be preserved, and the embalmer did a really good job. He had a secret recipe for embalming fluid and was one of the first to use formalin at the time, as many embalmers had been using arsenic previously. But apparently these zinc salts were the ingredient that preserved her so effectively. Rosalia is still intact as of a century later, and she's only recently started to show some signs of discoloration. The body itself is kept in a glass case in the Sicilian catacombs. But here's the weird part. The mummified corpse appears to blink. The explanation isn't very exciting, though. There's apparently a small window in the room where the body is kept, and her eyes are halfway open. The changing light throughout the day shines on her eyes from different angles and makes it appear as though they are opening and closing. Have you ever made up an original character? If so, be careful not to think about them too much, or they might haunt your house. Unless you want that to happen. I don't know you. According to an early form of Tibetan spirituality, a tulpa is an entity made purely from thought. Like you really concentrated and focused so hard on this thing that it became real. Now this particular tale takes place in a townhome in Greenwich Village, New York that was constructed in the 1800s. The earliest documentation of the home's supposedly haunted nature was in a book entitled Yankee Ghosts by Hans Holzer. Researching for the book, he interviewed the home's occupants, and he brought in a psychic to get a read on the property. The homeowners reported many strange phenomena, such as the inexplicable smell of violets and the sound of footsteps on the stairs at night. Residents and visitors alike had caught sight of a man in evening wear, a hat, and a cape slinking around in the hallway, only to vanish into thin air. Even the homeowner's dog reacted to this figure. Years later, in a 1975 magazine interview, prolific fiction writer Walter Gibson would claim that he knew what their ghost was. When I say prolific, I mean that Gibson wrote over 300 novels involving his detective character, the Shadow, while living in that same Greenwich Village home. Anyway, look at that. Evening wear, a cape, and a hat. And Gibson was adamant that their supposed haunting was actually a tulpa, or a psychic after-image of his character. This one is genuinely so lame, and I'm mad that I have to cover it. In 2021, a lunar rover belonging to China's space program caught this very blurry photo of a square thing in the distance. Positively compelling. And as we know, cubes cannot possibly occur in nature. Here to discuss that point, I have special guest, a naturally occurring cube. Hello! But of course, there was online speculation as to what this cube could be. Something alien related. I don't know. This. And it took quite a while for the little rover that could to find its way over to the cube. It had to traverse craters and rough terrain. But it was all worth it for this big reveal. It was just an optical illusion. This is what the rock looked like up close. You've boarded a plane and you are so excited for your trip, until you hear moaning and grunting over the intercom. Maybe even a little, "Oh yeah?" I would have assumed that the tension in the cockpit had gotten a little too high. Come on, it's in the name after all. This apparently started around 2022, with American Airlines passengers hearing in-flight announcements that sounded like this. The only commonality in these cases is that the plane flew through either LA or Dallas. In most cases, the crew were unable to stop the sounds, so it was just like that intermittently for the duration of the flight, because sitting in a metal tube full of farts isn't fun enough. The extremely vague official explanation is that it's some sort of malfunction with the PA system, and they're working on it. One would assume it's hackers, but reports by security analyst Andrew Tierney on Twitter would indicate that the system is pretty much impossible to hack. One possibility is that it was a problem with the pre-recorded messages. Maybe somebody was screwing around in the recording booth and they never deleted that part of the message. However, a flight attendant shared an internal briefing describing a flight in which crew and pilots were receiving similar messages over their interphone system, and the power button for the main cabin electricity repeatedly switched to the off position on its own. A murder confession on a live radio show. In 1997, in the middle of Howard Stern's radio show, he receives a call-in from a man claiming to have killed 12 women. The man introduces himself as Clay and says he's from the New Orleans area. Howard Stern, assuming the guy is making it up, continues to ask him questions, kind of antagonizing him. You know, Howard Stern stuff. The longer it went on, the more it became clear that this wasn't just some tasteless joke, so they started asking more serious questions. After receiving multiple reports, the FBI showed up to the station the following day in order to seize the audio recordings. Apparently the caller had revealed details about specific crimes that had never been made public by the authorities. He even revealed the name of the man who had been the prime suspect in one of the cases prior to his call. The caller is suspected to be Russell Elwood, who in 1999 was sentenced to life without parole for a different murder. He's suspected to be responsible for between 15 and 26 other homicides, but this specific call was never officially pinned on him. Behold, the Proton. Behold the Proton is a book that was published by Polish artist Stanislav Szukalski in 1980. The book details a scientific discipline that he himself invented and titled Zermatism, attempting to explain the origins of mankind. The name of the book derives from the fact that he believes humanity sprung up from Easter Island and that the first spoken language was called Proton. Having been an artist in Poland at the start of World War II, much of his earlier work was destroyed. Escaping to America with nothing to his name, he fell into obscurity for many years, using this time to devise his theories, before publishing this book at almost 90 years old. In his younger years, he was kind of racist, but by the time this book was published, he had learned to develop an appreciation for other cultures, and you can see the inspiration in his works. So I just wanted to show some of his works, plus the immediate analog that jumped out to me. His work? Mayan and Aztec temples. His work? Ancient Greek pottery. His work? Old European etchings, usually pertaining to alchemy. And fun fact, that's what a lot of my tattoos reference as well. What would you do if you woke up in the middle of the night and saw something smiling at you from your closet? This story originates from Darkness Radio in 2016 from a woman named Corrine. When she was a small child living in California, she and her two sisters shared a room. And their room had this style of closet, and her bed happened to be facing directly towards it. One night she wakes up to see the closet slightly ajar, and then she sees a hand reach out, with the fingers grabbing the edge of the door. Then out pops a head. And she describes it as looking similar to this Joker. Pale white with a wide, unhinged smile, and it was seemingly glowing orange from within. She hid under her blanket and would not look again until morning. Here's a mock-up of it that I found online in case you've been sleeping too well lately. The most obvious explanation would be sleep paralysis, a state between asleep and awake in which you're conscious but unable to move or speak. It's common to experience frightening hallucinations, or what some people believe to be visits from malicious entities. I have personally experienced it numerous times. I tend to get this flavor, and it's not fun. Real or not, this photo is unsettling. It's the mid-1950s, and the Cooper family just moved into a new home in Texas. In order to commemorate this, Mr. Cooper decides to take a photo of his wife, their two sons, and his mother. Nothing seemed amiss, and then a few weeks later, he takes the film to the local pharmacy to be developed, and this was one of the prints. What is that? The vibes are positively rancid, and I don't like looking at it. But if you're familiar with film photography, there is a comforting explanation. It's most likely a double exposure. And I'm going to be doing this next part in voiceover because I have a film camera here as a prop. So if you open up the back of the camera here, you'll see this slot where the film goes, and the film strip stretches over the shutter. The shutter opens and closes in order to expose light to the film. Film cameras like this will have a little dial or a button in order to advance the film. If you do not advance the film, it will expose the same spot on the film twice, meaning 2 pictures will be overlaid, which can be used by artists like Dwayne Michaels to create an effect like this. Or there is a more complicated process you can do in the darkroom with the enlarger that I can explain in another video, which is how Jerry Uelsmann created works like this long before we had Photoshop. Is the devil actually a kangaroo? Back in the mid-1800s, residents of Devon County, England awoke to find weird footprints in the snow, on top of roofs, traversing over stone walls, and apparently having crossed a river, with some seen walking up to the door of houses and then turning around. They covered a total area of around 100 miles or 160 kilometers. Oh, and the footprints looked as though they belonged to a bipedal, walking on 2 legs, creature with cloven hooves. And because this was the 1800s, everyone immediately went, must be the devil. Now, aside from the obvious answers, such as, it was a hoax, the chart mentions this one specifically. Kangaroo. There were rumors that someone in the area was keeping a menagerie in their house, and that multiple kangaroos got loose. Here's what kangaroo footprints look like. But a local reverend is on record saying he made that story up in order to calm down the townsfolk. Ooh, what is that? Sulfur and the supernatural. You know, this stinky yellow rock. The term brimstone, which you will often hear associated with hell in the Bible, is actually hydrogen sulfide. Our noses are extremely sensitive to sulfur and able to detect it in even the tiniest quantities. So hell is stinky. So you'll often hear the smell of sulfur accompanying tales of demonic possessions or hauntings by malevolent spirits, which could be chalked up to preconceptions based on the witness's religious beliefs, but I digress. However, the smell does also get associated with other supernatural entities. You may recall the smell of sulfur from the Falcon Lake UFO sighting episode. And ozone is another common alien smell. And if you pore over any number of supposed Sasquatch sightings, you'll notice one common trend. You'll smell him before you see him. So if you don't have a dog that you can blame your farts on, you can use ghosts now. You're welcome. It's kind of giving YouTube poop. The Agamemnon Counterpart is a weird video that was made by artists Jason Kovac and Michael Ronson in 2001, and then posted to YouTube in 2006. The video begins with text saying, "The year is 2571. A video cassette was found in a pile of rubble on the ruins of a certain blue planet. What you're about to witness are not the contents of that cassette. This is an entirely different recording." And I'll play a bit for you. And people started writing creepypastas about it, implying things like the screams in the background were actually screams of murder victims. The video did have a bit of a resurgence around 2013. I don't think weird art really constitutes an unexplained mystery. This is just extremely standard artist behavior. For example, this randomly appeared on a bulletin board at the art school I attended, me performing important research for this video. The electric universe hypothesis theorizes that all of the happenings in the universe rely on electrical, as opposed to gravitational, interactions. Plasma is the 4th state of matter consisting of superheated ionized gas. It's what stars are made of, including our big orange friend, the sun. Plasma is the most abundant form of matter in the universe, and its activity is governed by electromagnetic fields. You can see this in action if you want to research more about the current solar maximum we're having. And specifically, you can look up the Carrington event if you want something new to keep you awake at night. Electric universe may sound like a somewhat reasonable theory on the surface, but it would rip apart most of our understanding of how the universe works, including general relativity. Get out of here! Religious prophecy or just science fiction? Oahspe, a new Bible, was written by dentist John Newborough in 1882, claiming it contains new religious doctrines that were communicated to him via automatic writing. which is a supposed form of divination in which the medium writes with a pen and paper while in a psychic trance-like state. Oahspe is communicated by the author to mean the sky, the earth, and spirit. So, everything in its entirety, basically. The book has a lot of our usual suspects when it comes to spiritualism. An emphasis on service to others, ascension or enlightenment, different levels of the afterlife based on your soul's worldly deeds. He does indicate that eating animal products sends you right to hell. But whatever you may have done to end up in hell, you aren't necessarily stuck there forever. It kind of seems to be more like a jail sentence, and you do get out eventually. There's a heavy focus on cycles, from the seasons to the rise and fall of civilizations. In 1884, followers of the religion started a commune in New Mexico, and we all know how stuff like that usually goes. As anticipated, it didn't last very long as they ran into financial troubles and a lot of the members died from the flu. On a different note, the text contains the first use of the word starship in reference to an intergalactic spacecraft. You can find the book in its entirety on Angel Fire. I didn't read the whole thing, it's like 900 pages. If you consider yourself an urban explorer, here's something you don't want to encounter. This is another one that was phrased so vaguely I couldn't figure out which option it was, so I just picked the best one. This story was posted on the Let's Not Meet subreddit around 10 years ago by a since-deleted user from Wales. As teenagers, the Redditor and his friends decided to sneak into the inside of a bridge like this. I didn't even realize this was an option, but they were in there. This is how they got in there, so amazing start. And they were crawling all over the place, squeezing through tight crevices on their stomachs. Needless to say, it was not easy to navigate. At around the halfway point, after squeezing through there, they catch something in their flashlight beam. A folding chair, facing the wall. And on the wall is a photograph of a nude woman, with the eyes very carefully cut out. Of the photo, not the lady, thank God. And then they notice something on the ground. A used condom. Full of blood! Like any reasonable individual would, they leave immediately. After the first post got a lot of attention, OP went back as an adult with a friend in tow and brought back these photos. That's piss. Crime scene tape? No! And I don't have a meme to reference on this one, but there is poo-poo in this bag. Did you have an imaginary friend as a kid? Or, in this case, more like enemy, I guess. This one comes from Reddit user Professor_Dog on an Ask Reddit thread about children having scary imaginary friends. When the poster's son was just learning to talk, he described his pal, Purple Mommy, a woman with purple skin, cloudy white eyes, and long matted hair. They would periodically find their son outside of his crib in the morning, assuming he climbed out, even though at that point he was too little to be doing that. He said that it was because Purple Mommy picks him up at night. And to quote directly, Purple Mommy needs a band-aid because she has blood everywhere. Purple Mommy has no smile. Purple Mommy can take her head off. And Purple Mommy really doesn't like Daddy. Whenever the son woke up crying during the night and they went to check on him, he would say it's because Purple Mommy would not let him sleep. Whenever they asked him where Purple Mommy was, he always pointed to the same corner of his room, behind his open door. And then after about a year of this, he just never mentioned her again. Did this teenage girl predict her own death? Ever since she was a child, Kathy Hobbs feared that she would not make it past the age of 16. Her parents divorced when she was 8, and she subsequently lived in Las Vegas with her mother. Obviously, as her 16th birthday approached, she started getting freaked out. When she woke up alive on her 16th birthday, she was very relieved and adjusted to life as a normal teenager and started making plans for her future. She applied to cosmetology school with dreams of opening her own salon one day. Then, on the night of July 3rd, 1987, 16-year-old Kathy would go to the store a few blocks from her home and never return. Her mother contacted police, and the search began. 9 days later, her body was found in a remote stretch of desert, having been struck over the head with a large rock. Exactly 3 months later, police received an anonymous lead claiming to have witnessed Kathy being abducted outside of the store, but this ended up leading nowhere. Eventually, the case would be closed and attributed to serial killer Michael Lee Lockhart, but was never pursued in court because he had already been sentenced to death for 3 other cases. And he was subsequently executed by the state of Texas in 1997. Did cryptids go extinct? This theory proposes that cryptids did actually exist at some point, possibly up until as recently as the 20th century, and that they were fairly rare, but witnesses genuinely saw them. I assume this mainly applies to the ones that could plausibly be a real animal, like sea serpents or the Loch Ness Monster. Hey, even the platypus and the giant squid were considered mythical at one point. But like many real, 100% authentic animals, they faced threats from things like pollution and habitat loss and eventually became extinct. You might say, oh, but what about modern day sightings? Consider the thylacine, an extinct species of carnivorous marsupial. From Australia, obviously. It looked and acted like a canine thanks to convergent evolution, and it had stripes like a tiger. But it had a pouch, and it was described as having a distinct, clean, fresh odor. Oh, it's a puppy! Man, what is up with the mouth situation? That is disagreeable. The last known thylacine died in 1936, but there are still supposed sightings to this day, earning it honorary cryptid status. Look at that and tell me he is not a rascal. You could look up rascal in the dictionary and this would be the picture. That's somebody's... That's like a 15-year-old's DeviantArt OC. The Little Red Man of Paris was thought to be a supernatural entity described as a little guy wearing red, and he was an omen of tragedy. He mainly seemed to be an ongoing issue for royalty. First appearing to Catherine de' Medici in 1564, he was believed to foretell the Bartholomew's Day massacre. Henry IV saw the little fella prior to his assassination. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette both saw him prior to having their heads confiscated. And this petite gremlin was bothering Napoleon on the regular, always showing up with things like prophecies and questionable soul contracts. And just to be clear, he doesn't spawn in or anything magical like that. Nope, he just has to walk into the palace like anybody else and demand to speak to Napoleon. So that was probably just some short guy. Short by Napoleon standards. Yoga? You mean the devil's exercise? The satanic panic about yoga. You know, where they commit atrocious acts like stretching or sitting quietly. Spare us all. This one hit the spotlight in 2013 because one of the candidates for lieutenant governor in Virginia believed it wholeheartedly. And I mean, it's mostly just the usual demonization of non-Western spiritual practices. Grow up. He believed that by meditating and emptying your mind, you were leaving your body sitting around as an open vessel for anything to waltz into. Boom, now you're possessed. But you would have no idea that there are demons rattling around in there by the time you got back. Obviously, supporters of yoga will let you know that the purpose is for things like peace and enlightenment and flexibility, not anything evil. Considering the fact that most mainstream religions are all talking about the same thing but using different words and stories, I don't really understand where the prejudice comes in. I don't know, it just makes a lot more sense to embrace our common ground rather than to invent arbitrary things like yoga to get mad at each other over. But that's just me. Okay, who broke the birds? You can tell me, I'm not gonna be mad, just disappointed. This video became an online sensation in Canada, in which this bird was caught stopped in midair, not moving at all. Well, that certainly is odd. A bunch of people online couldn't even come to a consensus of what kind of bird it is, let alone what's up with it. Everyone does seem pretty sure that it's at least not alive in the video. And I mean, there's nothing visibly holding it there because it's above the power lines and the trees. So I mean, it could be attached to like clear fishing line or something, but that's just not immediately apparent. Some residents recognized the area and went out to go look for the bird after seeing the video, but it wasn't there at that point. So unfortunately, I don't have a concrete explanation for you. So I'll leave you with this video of a different bird that's even more unsettling.
A federal highway from Valley, on Basraya from Salajaya to Wisconsin, from the National Palace, and Johor and Jalan Kota Tinggi from
heard a lot of superstitions about mirrors, but I don't think you've heard this one. In February 1936, Geoffrey DeRosier was hospitalized with an unspecified but seemingly non-life-threatening injury, along with a few other patients in the same ward. He asks a fellow patient to pass him a mirror so he can comb his hair. He stares into it for a few moments before positively freaking out. He starts hollering to the other patients, "I'm going to die, I've seen it in the mirror." He tosses it aside, muttering his last words about nobody picking it up, before coughing and dropping dead, before the nurses even had a chance to get to him. The other patients immediately tried to pick up the mirror, but couldn't. Really good at following directions, obviously. Then hospital staff tried to pick it up, but couldn't. Then, after the incident was published in a local newspaper, random people from around town started showing up to try and pick up the mirror. They really said, "I don't care about your last words, I'm picking that thing up." The way the mirror landed on the table, a corner of it was hanging off the edge, and supposedly if you grabbed the mirror by that corner, you could lift the whole table without it detaching. Staff were eventually able to knock it loose with an ice pick, but it ended up shattering the second they picked it up off the table. A UFO sighting from the 16th century. During the year of 1566, residents of Basel, Switzerland were subject to strange sunrises and sunsets in which the sun was dim and red. There was also a lunar eclipse, so they got to see a red moon as well. These sunrises and sunsets were supposedly accompanied by red and black spheres that appeared to be fighting, described as moving with great speed and precision and making chattering sounds. Of course, at the time, this was chalked up to some miraculous religious phenomenon. I don't know how reliable it is, but there were multiple accounts of these events from several different sources that all lined up. Some of the theories I saw proposed online were things like a meteor shower or a wildfire. Because here's what the sun looks like if the sky is full of wildfire smoke. And the so-called spheres might have just been bits of debris blowing around. Or perhaps it was some other natural phenomenon that doesn't happen very often. I will say, I saw the total solar eclipse a few years ago, and if I was some ancient villager, I would have pissed my pants. The gods are so mad at us right now. Kudos to this marketing team, I guess. This one was pretty easily debunked. I know, that's no fun. I'm so sorry. I'm about as grumpy about this one as I was about that stupid cube. This video occasionally spreads around online as real UFO footage that was captured by a fisherman in Spain. Yeah, it was from a 2009 ad campaign for a web platform called Terra. You can even find a behind-the-scenes video of how they made it. We've got actors on a fishing boat, a chartered helicopter, and a metal spacecraft that they made in a garage.